Just when you thought you'd seen it all, this dude decided to stop by the Sting house. Oh yeah, this dude made major headlines back in the day, but after all these years, what's he been up to now? You see, John Kennelly was a real piece of work. I mean, I can't even begin to describe how gross the whole situation was. Kennelly, under the guise of Special Guy 29, started an extremely explicit chat with a male setup from the Watchdog organization. What started with exchanging a couple of pictures soon took a different turn. Kennelly suggested that he would love to hang out with the setup, and well, he was aware of their age difference. But that didn't stop him from saying that he found the setup so freaking hot. And that's not all. He then claimed that he'd be totally down to be the guy's boyfriend if given the chance. And well, this dude had a dislike for using protection. Oh yeah, he went there. I mean, talk about desperate. But guess what? Kennelly wasn't just being dishonest. He was spinning a whole web of lies. He pretended to be this cool 11th grade prep school teacher in his late 20s, when in reality, he was a middle-aged dude without a job. Now, don't forget, this was the second sting operation conducted by the Watchdog organization. And back then, they had no idea what to expect from people who got caught in the sting. However, the producers wanted to see how far Kennelly was willing to go, and so they dropped a request to walk into the house in his underwear. Now, apparently, Kennelly never wore any, and so the setup asked to come over as is. And what do you know? Within an hour of their initial conversation, Kennelly was making plans to get this date going. And on D-Day, the dude showed up with a 12-pack and carried out the setup's request to a T. In the end, the only piece of clothing left on him were his socks. And boy, what an entrance he made. But it doesn't end there. As he stood there all natural, he began counting to 100. Like, we playing hide and seek now, bro? And just when you thought it couldn't get any weirder, surprise, surprise, Chris joined in on the fun too, but thankfully he kept his clothes on. But Kennelly? He was too busy counting to notice the intruder. While Kennelly was quite evidently in shock, I can't even imagine what must be running through Chris's mind at this point. I mean, how many times do you come face to face with such a delightful sight? Anyway, Chris broke the silence by offering Kennelly a towel to cover himself. Probably the most sane thing to do given the situation.
Go ahead and cover him.
Certainly. I'm sorry. What's going on here?
And then, it was time to dig. When questioned about the situation, Kennelly first assumed Chris was the setup's father and tried to shift the blame onto his so-called son for inviting him over. But Chris obviously knew better.
So he just chose you out of the blue and said, come on over, get naked, and walk into the kitchen.
Back when Chris asked him about his age, the dude started playing around. What's more, he couldn't even keep his story straight about his job, flip-flopping from being a school bus driver to a school teacher. With every minute, the lies continued to pile, and there even came a moment when Kennelly realized he'd run out of ideas.
And you thought it was appropriate to walk into the home of a 14-year-old boy.
Chris, on the other hand, didn't back down, and this pushed Kennelly into blurting out the truth.
You're a school bus driver or a teacher?
Teacher.
You're a teacher.
But what Chris had to say next was baffling.
Turned out later that he was neither a teacher nor a bus driver. In fact, he was unemployed and had been for some time.
You see, Kennelly had some really weird plans for the day, but somehow he didn't think that any of this was wrong. When Chris continued to question him, Kennelly quickly backtracked, saying he probably would have chickened out. Okay, for someone who showed up like he did, yeah, would have he chickened out? Nah, I don't think so. And Chris wasn't buying any of his nonsense. He started to read from the chat logs to prove his point, but Kennelly, in a desperate attempt to save face, cut him off, claiming he was just chatting. At that moment, Chris totally lost it.
I was just chatting. I was just...
Chatting? You're sitting in this kitchen, John.
I mean, can't argue with that logic. Chris finally laid down the law. It's illegal to have online conversations as explicit as the ones he had set up. And for a moment there, it looked like Kennelly was hit in the face by a truckload of reality.
What do you think should happen to you?
I don't know, sir.
But the real twist came when Chris revealed his true identity, and in that moment, Kennelly's entire world came crashing down. He scrambled to grab hold of the towel as he reached out to collect the rest of his clothing.
You can take the towel to the garage and get dressed.
Please take the towel off me.
Back in the day, the watchdog organization worked independently, and the cops weren't around to arrest this moron. So after his little grilling session with Chris, Kennelly was free to leave, and the dude hastily dressed himself and left the scene, never to come back again. But that wasn't how the story ended. Less than 24 hours later, this jerk was back online.
Ever gone through what that man went through when he got to this house, but now this is just amazing.
He tried to establish contact once again with another setup, and while he didn't bother to change his username, he did change his alias to Shane. He was consistent about one thing at least, lying about his age and still claiming to be in his late 20s. But this is where things got even more twisted. When the other person asked if he was gay, Kennelly straight up lied, saying he wasn't. And this same guy who earlier wanted to be a boyfriend, this time claimed to have a girlfriend. I mean, I've honestly lost track of all the lies. Since he had already visited the Sting house, the producers tried to change the location. And with a few minutes, Kennelly was ready to meet at the local McDonald's for yet another meet and greet situation. But that's when the conversation took a truly disturbing turn. The new guy started asking Kennelly about explicit stuff, like how big he was and whether he was wearing any underwear. You see, the crew had already caught on to this weakness, and they wanted to see how far he would go. But Kennelly surprised everyone when he decided to roleplay. This time, he was the one to make the request. Kennelly asked the setup to skip that piece of clothing, and at this point, he wasn't even trying to hide his true intentions anymore. In a world where you'd expect people to learn from their mistakes, Kennelly proves that this just isn't that kind of world. The audacity and recklessness here are truly mind-boggling. And once again, Kennelly was in for a surprise he never asked for. He bumped into Chris at the restaurant. However, Kennelly stuck to his usual strategy of denying everything. He just kept repeating, "I just came to get something to eat," as if that would erase all the evidence against him.
For 24 years.
I just came to get something to eat.
And I have very seldom been at a loss for words.
He thought he could lie his way out of the mess, even when there was enough proof staring at him right in the face. I mean, the audacity is astonishing. But Chris didn't let him off the hook though. He once again started reading from the chat logs, laying bare all the explicit stuff Kennelly had said. The fact that this guy was on camera with all this evidence and he was still trying to play innocent is just absurd. But Kennelly kept repeating the same thing on and on like a broken record.
I'm gonna get something to eat.
John, we've been through this before. What are you doing?
But this is where things got even more bizarre. Kennelly got annoyed with the cameraman and told him to back off, all while still claiming he didn't know what he was doing there. The dude was just lashing out at everyone he could at this point.
When you said,
When you get those.
no, I can't, John, I can't do that. That's their job, is to record video.
Meanwhile, Chris came to the defense of the camera crew, reminding Kennelly that he had brought this upon himself. Then, in a last-ditch effort, Kennelly tried to blame his actions on a death in the family. I mean, seriously.
The death of my family. And I never handled it well.
People grieve when they lose a loved one. They don't use it as an excuse for grooming someone else. What Kennelly was doing here was a despicable attempt to deflect blame. He did, however, mention that he was seeing a psychiatrist and had 2 appointments the following day. Well, this man clearly needed more than just therapy, and some viewers even pointed out that he had to have been mentally unstable. But Chris tried to explain that his actions could land him in jail, but the dude didn't seem to care.
In 2 days that we know of, that's a federal offense. You can go to prison for it.
After all this, Kennelly, with his shoes untied, jumped into his vehicle and drove off. But guess what? Kennelly's disturbing escapades finally caught up with him. And the second face-off with Chris, the police decided to pay him a visit and raid his apartment. They seized his computer, and it was game over for this guy. Kennelly found himself in hot water when Fairfax County arrested him and charged him with a felony, using a communications device to facilitate certain offenses involving people not his age. That was no small matter. It was a Class 5 felony that could put him behind bars for up to 10 years. You would think that this would make anyone rethink their actions, right? But Kennelly had a plan. He was all set to go on trial before a jury, but just before things got real, he changed his tune and pleaded guilty to the initial felony charge on June 12, 2006. It's as if he realized there was no escaping the consequences of his actions, and maybe he wanted to avoid an even harsher penalty. In September 2006, Judge M. Langhorne Keith laid down the law. Kennelly received a suspended 2-year prison sentence, meaning he didn't go to jail immediately, but he had to stay on his best behavior. He was also slapped with 3 years of probation, a lifetime registration as a offender, as he should be, a ban on accessing any online chat rooms, I mean a no-brainer there, and a requirement to have no unsupervised contact with children under the age of 18. Yes, he eventually did face the consequences for his actions, and it does sound like a lot, but did Kennelly learn his lesson? Fast forward to March 10th, 2007 in Cub Run Park. Two kids were on a leisure walk, minding their own business, when things took a terrifying turn. There stood a man, wearing nothing but his underwear, lunging towards them, trying to grab their attention. Understandably, these poor people were frightened out of their mind, and I mean, who wouldn't be? They made a run for it, with this creepy man chasing right after them. It was like something straight out of a horror movie, but luckily, he disappeared into the nearby woods, leaving them terrified and bewildered. Kennelly was back to his old ways, and things had only gotten worse. This time, it wasn't the Sting House, it wasn't the fast food joint, but the dude was flashing people in the freaking public park. And once again, he found himself in the middle of an investigation. On May 30th, 2007, he was slapped with 2 charges of indecent exposure. I mean, how many times does someone need to be caught doing inappropriate things in public before they're held accountable? We're at, what, 3 separate attempts at this point? Additionally, Kennelly was already in custody at the Adult Detention Center for violating his probation. The big question now was whether he'd receive jail time or was put on extended probation. Turns out, Kennelly went absconding over the next few years. It's a shame that some individuals seem incapable of learning their lesson, no matter how many chances they're given. But look who resurfaced in June of 2022. None other than Kennelly himself. He was spotted at a hotel in southwestern Pennsylvania, and here's the twist. He wasn't alone. His mother was right there with him. But the real jaw-dropper is that a keen-eyed TCAP fan recognized him and quickly snapped a picture of him. Well, at least he looks far more presentable this time around. As for the latest update in 2023, Kennelly is still unemployed according to the Virginia Offender Registry. But there's more to this story. After the sting operation, Kennelly did manage to land a job at a sandwich shop. However, his secret identity came out and he was promptly shown the door. It's karma at work that he went from being caught on camera to being fired when people found out who he was. Now, here's an interesting twist. Kennelly seems to have found some sort of refuge in the Rocky Horror Picture Show community in his town. They've essentially claimed him as one of their own and are ready to defend him against any negativity that comes his way. It's a bit puzzling, to be honest. While everybody is entitled to their own support systems, you can't forget his action. If you remember his appearances on TCAP, Kennelly was the first predator to show up Sting House. Not exactly a title worth bragging over, but it's an unfortunate piece of history that would tag along for his entire life. In another twist, the McDonald's where Kennelly famously claimed he was just there for a meal is now out of business. It's just as if the universe decided that cursed place should just be forgotten. Now, there's an eerie account from June 2021 during a Reddit AMA, where people were sharing what these men did before getting caught on the show. One user claims to have met Kennelly at a community event. According to the user, John kept insisting they should visit his house. The user felt something was off about him, sensing his weird vibe, which I mean, good instincts there. So, after all that went down, do you think Kennelly should have received a longer jail term? How can anyone be sure that he's not going to revert back to his old ways? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, do me a solid and drop a like. Hit that subscribe button and turn on my post notification. And if you thought this video was crazy, guess what? I've got another mind-blowing video right here, loaded with even more jaw-dropping stories. So make sure you check it out.